Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Exercise is Bullshit, which for our first-time listeners, bullshit stands for bodybuilding, utilizing logical lifting and scientific heuristics to inform training. And I am joined by one of the best scientific minds in the industry today. Stu Phillips joins me. Stu is a PhD and the world's leading expert in protein metabolism, widely regarded as one of the world's leading minds on all things exercise science. Stu is a senior distinguished professor at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, our neighbors to the north. Aside from being a great researcher, Stu is a fantastic leader of the next generation. Stu's lab has created some of the brightest minds in the field of exercise science, students that continue to bring exercise science to the forefront of modern research. And we'll talk about your grant here too, about how you're going to continue to do that. But students including previous guests like Alicia D'Souza, Derek Van Avery, Lauren Colenso-Semple, and Sarah Oikawa, among others I'm probably forgetting. Stu also recently started his own podcast called Real Exercise Science with another professor, Dr. Martin Gabala, who is also the world's leading expert on high-intensity interval training. So just a power duo there. I can't recommend the show highly enough. Stu, thank you so much genuinely for coming on the show today. I'm so excited to finally have you. We've been talking about this for like a year. And I can't tell you how much I genuinely appreciate you making the time.
My pleasure.
I know how busy you are.
My pleasure, Logan, of course. Great to be back. That was a very generous introduction. But I'm glad that you mentioned the trainees. As I've said before, they're the reason, people go, oh, you do such great research. I'm like, actually, I sit here. That's not
my name's last on most of the papers.
In my office.
Yeah.
They parade in and bring me the data, and I'm like, oh, you guys are amazing. So I look good because they do the jobs that they do. But thanks for mentioning them. They're the heartbeat for sure.
Of course. So is there anything I missed? Do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about the show, how that kind of came to fruition? And then, off air here, we were talking a little bit about this awesome grant that you guys got for the university. So maybe we could spend five or 10 minutes just kind of talking about those two things.
Sure. So the show is, Marty Gabala is, he and I were actually hired on the same day, believe it or not.
Really? That's crazy.
27 28 years ago now. I know it seems like forever, but I can almost still remember the day because we were both so happy we got a job. So our careers have followed each other, sort of, like I said, year for year almost. And we've had, students and research programs that have kind of gone in different directions. Marty, the more the high intensity, me, the resistance training. But we've been colleagues and collaborators that whole time. We've had projects in common. We've had students in common. We've, worked together. We've done different things. And I'll say this, first, he's a friend, obviously, outside of work and everything. And we get along really well. I can honestly say, hand on heart, and in 28 years, we've never exchanged a bad word with each other. We've had disagreements.
But, Stu, I think that's just because you're Canadian.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that's because
I think that's it's personality. Marty and I are very different in how we run things, but I think we complement each other. I'll let you guess who's the high compliance versus low compliance version for those of you who might know me. But so
I don't know. Just because of the way you said that, I'm going to guess that maybe he's high compliance.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's great. That's awesome. Like Marty's definitely, and he was the chair of the department. I'm now the chair of the department here. So, we've enjoyed a long history together. The genesis of the podcast really came out of both of us doing a lot of podcast appearances. And I was sort of saying to Marty, I'm like, we should do our own podcast. And he's like, yeah, we should. And I'm like, and then it's taken about 4 or 5 years for us to get our act together. But yeah, it's been fun. Thanks for the shout out. And the donation that you mentioned is, that's been a lot of years in the making. And thanks to Marcy McCall-McBain and her husband, John McCall-McBain. I taught Marcy when she was a student here, like to give it some perspective. She's gone on to obviously bigger, better things. They just made a donation through their foundation for $50 million, and that will establish the kinesiology and the McCall-McBain Kinesiology and Health Span Institute here at McMaster. So fun
And what is
times.
the focus in that particular sub college and research laboratory?
Yeah, basically, it's the whole idea of, a lot more of what we do. We'll hire 4 new faculty members to support a research program that looks at things that support health span. And so, we think that health span is a much more valuable concept than longevity per se. So not to chase the years as a number, but basically to chase the quality of life that
The
you have,
quality.
in the years that you're given, right? So I
Yeah,
think they
I love that.
probably intersect. I just think the obsession with longevity, and I think Marcy and John kind of share that vision that it's not as big a deal as a lot of people are
Yeah,
making.
why live to 150 if you have to get your butt wiped for you for the last 60 years?
No,
So
no interest in that here.
yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome and super cool. And
Thank you.
also, I do have a master's. So if you guys are accepting applications, I was
Sure.
just going to tell you. No, I trained Alicia a while back, probably like a year ago.
Right.
After she had come on the podcast, we did a
Yeah. Yeah.
workout at
Yeah.
just the student facility there,
Yeah.
and it's freaking awesome. Like
Yeah.
if
Oh,
I could go
thanks.
back to school again, all
Yeah.
over again, I
Yeah.
mean, just Atlantis stuff everywhere,
Yeah.
which I know is a Canadian brand
Yeah.
anyway, so it
Yeah.
kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But way like one of the coolest university just like training facilities I've ever seen. So
Appreciate it.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's
have to
fun.
throw my hat into the ring there, Stu,
Yeah.
and see if I can come hang out with you guys.
Do it.
Okay, so before we get started today, one of the things I love to ask my guests is just, I think the mark of a real scientist is the ability to accept ideas, but not let them define who you are as a research. So that way, when you get your ideas challenged, you have the ability to adapt objectively rather than letting it affect your ego, right? We see a lot of that in this space. People get married to their ideas. So as a leader in the scientific community, obviously you're at the forefront of where myth and superstition and age-old bro science comes to get challenged and tested. With that in mind, and I know you're part of so many research projects, but is there anything in the last, say, 3 to 5 years that you've really had to take a step back from your preconceived kind of notions and reconsider based on mounting evidence to the contrary?
Yeah, there's probably, I think, 2 big things that, like early in my life, I spent a ton of time in a gym. And most of it was guided by, at the time, like the Weider brothers, who were Canadian, but really shaped a lot of bodybuilding and programs and around, and people like Charles Poliquin and Mike Menser and all of that stuff. Like I consumed that stuff as a teenager, and I had Charles Atlas bands and all kinds of stuff. I thought it was awesome. But gyms were dark, kind of smelly places. The Y was where I worked out, and yeah, I mean, it was guys. It was 100% guys. Like you would never see a woman in there, like ever. It was, somebody in the corner who was generally a really big guy was the person everybody looked up to. We would all sort of go around and be like, I think he's gonna like bench press. God, like how much weight is that? So you get a lot of that, and it was sort of passed down. And I think muscle and fitness was my go-to Bible when I was younger. I think for some, it's probably still their go-to, to be fair.
Some still might be, yep.
Yeah, but the science of behind underpinning a lot of that stuff is really grown up, right? And we're beginning to understand now that it's not just big muscles and guys in gyms, and not that that's not great, but lots of health benefits, lots of sort of tangential things that are happening. Why is it associated with better resistance against dementia, resistance against depression? These things are just insane if you had thought about them, I think 20 years ago. But so in my world, we were brought up with the knowledge that it was heavy weights were absolutely needed to induce hypertrophy and or muscle growth, and that's something that we began to question several years ago. And I think to the extent now that if you look at the recent ACSM resistance training position stand, and I think did you have Brad Courier on?
That's who I forget
Yeah,
to
great.
mention.
I
Yes,
thought I
Brad. I
saw
just had
that.
Brad
So
on. Sorry, Brad.
it's Brad drove that project, and and really came back again with the synthesis of evidence that heavy weights, they work, so they're sufficient, but their need, and so in other words, if you don't do them, it doesn't happen, is actually not true. And so I think that rocks a few people because it's a foundational piece of knowledge that's probably has its origins all the way back in 1946 in Thomas DeLorme's classic paper, heavy resistance exercises. And yeah, it's just that there's more choice, and not that you have to lift lighter weights, if that's the right way of saying it, but they work too for hypertrophy. If you want strength, like lift heavy stuff, there's no question about that. That's a practice phenomenon. And I think the other big one that I've had to sort of roll back a lot of my understanding on, and this is generated as much from the evidence that I thought that we had right, is the protein issue and how big that is as a player in determining your muscle growth. And 20 years ago, Stu would have told you it's a really big deal. Lift weights, but you need protein. And the two together, and I probably would have drawn a line in the middle and said, this is one half, this is the other half. And then, time marches on, and I'm beginning to see that resistance training probably matters and lifting weights matters a whole lot more than the other sort of side of the equation being protein. I'm at the point now where the analogy that I've sort of used, and people have probably heard it, is that resistance training literally bakes the cake and protein is the icing on top. And not that it's unimportant, but it's
nobody wants a dry cake.
Yeah,
Let's be
yeah,
honest.
yeah.
Yeah.
People go, is it like a German chocolate cake with a big layer of icing? I said, probably it's like I don't even know what style of cake, but it's a pretty thin
I'm not
layer.
fluent in enough of cake terminology.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have the right type of cake, but it's a pretty thin
So what
layer.
is that? Yeah, what does that equate to now? Because forever I've also been kind of quoting the zero point 0.7 to 1.2 grams per pound kind of protein number. I know I've seen it as, as low as like zero point 0.5 up to 2 grams per pound. Like, where do you kind of sit on that spectrum now? And I'm sure, again, it is a spectrum, right? It obviously depends on the person, but what's sort of the recommendation you're giving these days, assuming that somebody is also obviously taking care of their resistance training piece?
Right. So, I mean, I think that it's zero point 0.8 grams per kilo, so that's about 0.35 grams per pound, and 1.6 would be twice that, so that's zero point 0.7 grams per pound. And in my mind, at least, and I don't. This is not an opinion that some people that are out there share. It's really hard to find something that shows much benefit beyond that. And the scenario where a lot of people have sort of pegged, well, what if I'm cutting, I'm losing weight, and they say, well, protein is able to mitigate some of and this is the line that's doing the heavy work, is lean mass retention. And I'm like, that may be true, but lean mass isn't muscle mass. And, so there's the unpacking of a complex sort of topic. But, lots of people are able to measure lean mass with DEXA. And, DEXA is a machine that was made to measure bone. It does a really good job with that. Everything else that it measures is pretty soft. And again, it's data that we've generated, and Alicia actually generated it,
Yeah,
where
the
we measured,
creatine
the
D3, is that right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
gave people this oral creatine tablet labeled with an isotope, and creatine goes into your muscle, almost 98% of it, and it gets turned into creatinine. And we used to do a collective, like a 24-hour urine collection, and measure creatinine excretion as a very good index of muscle. And when you do that and you compare the amount of muscle to the amount of lean mass, just as a spot estimate, that's what Alicia does. But stay tuned. We've got some change data coming out later this year, I'm sure. And Derek generated some of that. So it's going to be, I don't want to steal their thunder. It's great. It's great data. But
I'll have to get Derek back on.
yeah, you'll get him back on. Don't worry. He's about
He's
to
great.
defend his
Yeah.
PhD. I say
Yes,
that.
I saw that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
he's sending me all kinds of stuff to edit, and he's getting close to the end. So it's a really another milestone. But when I saw those data, I was like, I literally was kind of, I could smack me around a little bit. And I mean, I had a sense that it was a portion of lean mass. How little it could be was, it could be as low as 36% or as high as 76%. And when you look at that, it could be either really good or really not very good. And more importantly, how does the change compare between the two? And I think that that's really sort of just created a ripple in my world. And so we're doing some more analysis to kind of clarify that question. And I think then when you look at how much protein actually does, like I'm like, it's in there and it's probably important, but I'm sort of getting to the point now where I think it's a real last squeeze of the cloth in terms of, lean mass
What's
gain.
doing the heavy lifting for, no pun
Yeah,
intended.
and there's puns all over the place, right? But
Yeah.
so what we really need to get a handle on is not the lean mass because, and not that like, and I get it, that's data you can collect at scale, but the muscle mass. And probably in some scenarios of weight loss and a few other things. So, that's a question we'll be tackling in the next little while for sure.
So a couple follow-ups, and then we'll get into our main kind of topics here. But just from a study setup standpoint, like how to actually measure that and the effectiveness of different levels of protein, would that be hypothetically again something where it's like one group is getting say zero point 0.4 grams per pound, and then another is getting maybe zero point 0.8 grams per pound, both doing resistance training, and then seeing how that affects? Maybe would you want to do like a caloric deficit to see if you're holding on to more muscle mass there?
Yeah,
Like, how do you think you would structure that?
I think you're spot on. Like it has to be some type of dose response. There needs to be a range. You could put people under stress, like in a caloric deficit. Um, I'm of the opinion that unless you tightly control that caloric deficit, which we've done in the past, it's not easy to do, but we've done that in the past.
Yeah, hard to do
Is
in
that
real
the
world studies.
relationships that you get actually that the curve gets smeared all over the place. And I'm aware of some people, and I get it, like it's a resource issue and everything. They just ask people to lose weight, which they can, people can do. I think the opportunity maybe with these GLP-1 drugs exists
I was
because
just gonna
it
say,
takes
yeah.
off a little bit of the tension on the elastic band, and people can do it. Then you probably need to move into people with a lot of body fat and room to lose, quote unquote, and they could spare lean. And I think a lot of people, then it gets down to, there's a group of people that definitely follow me on Instagram who are bodybuilders, and they're like, what about people who are at 4% body fat? And I'm like, you guys are like, I mean, I know you're not, it's not like astronauts, but you're
Yeah,
a
yeah.
pretty unique group.
Unique.
you know
Yeah, for
and I'm
sure.
like, now we're beginning to talk about people, and that you're at the tail end. And
But it might be interesting to see that research though in those highly muscled groups to
yes,
see like how does protein affect people on that far end of the spectrum,
yeah,
as well as
absolutely.
like really obese individuals if they're taking GLPs, because obviously one of the critiques of GLP drugs is that it's indiscriminate weight loss, right? So then does protein become a factor if you're having higher protein, well, hopefully doing resistance training while losing a ton of weight? Again, I know tons of variables, hard to actually know hypothetically, but super
lots of
interesting
lots of things to
research. Yeah.
figure out. And again, even if you're on a GLP-1, I think if you're on a GLP-1 and you take protein, I think it's like it's not going to do
Yeah.
anything. Lifting the
Compared.
weights on the
Yeah.
GLP-1, awesome. Lifting the weights and the protein. And this is a little bit around some of the comments. And you mentioned, you've seen some of the LinkedIn work. I think that that's the what we talk about, the wraparound care. It's probably it's activity, it's nutrition, it's sleep, it's all kinds of things that GLP-1s are a tool. They're not the tool. So they're part of, I think, what should be a complete suite of care in anybody that's taking them for sure.
Yeah, hopefully you guys can do some cool research there in the longevity center. And then my last question, just a quick one. Like, I remember talking to Alicia about this testing mechanism. Do you think this will ever be widely available, or is this only something that would be available to like researchers and labs? Because again, with body composition tech, it seems like it's always 10 years behind.
Right.
Like Bod Pod, or I'm sorry, yeah, Bod Pod was the
Hmm.
gold standard for a while,
Yeah.
right? And then by the time people got Bod Pods, it was DEXA.
Yeah.
Now there's a bunch of DEXA places opening. It's
Yeah.
like, nope, that sucks too. We're doing D3
Yeah.
creatinine. So
Yeah.
it's like, do you think this will ever be something that people could do from home, or would it always be kind of a research?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that the point and the people that are really spearheading this and have spearheaded it in the aging population first are Bill Evans and Mark Hellerstein, who are at UC Berkeley, and they own the patent on the test. To be honest with you, it's not that you can't do the analyses through different ways, but I think if the utility of measuring muscle accurately, not lean mass muscle is shown in clinical scenarios, then you could expect that this test will become a standard, sort of lab test. Now, you have to take the pill. You've got to take a tiny little pill of a labeled creatine molecule, and it's stable isotopes. It's not radioactive or anything like that. And you have to get a urine sample. So there's a little wrinkle in there. It's not like just showing up and either giving a urine sample
Exactly.
or getting a
Yeah.
blood sample done. And there's a few sort of things in the equations that need to get worked out. I would think that it will become more available to folks. I do know some people in the research sphere who have used it and are probably using it in future trials. So, stay tuned. I think it's going to become more common. Maybe what we could do if we had enough data from DEXA and that test is build sort of an algorithm and show that there's a relationship between the two. So far, we don't see
Yeah.
a great relationship, but it could just be because
The more
we don't
data.
have many data points.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, make it a more robust finding for
yeah,
sure. Well,
yeah,
that's super cool. Well, I'm not sure we're going to get through all of these because I know you've got a super tight schedule
yeah.
today. But a
Apologies.
few things I wanted to discuss with you was this LinkedIn post that I saw recently, which was about orthometria. So I came across that post. That was just a couple days ago. I had a whole different thing I wanted to talk to you about, and then I saw that. I absolutely love the idea of the obsession with smart devices
Yeah.
really potentially being more detrimental than positive. So, can you talk to me a little bit about this idea, what it means, share some of your thoughts and observations that kind of led you to this idea of putting this together?
Yeah, so I think everybody understand the term orthorexia, so an obsession with your diet, it wasn't really part of the normal vernacular, 15 years ago, let's say, probably maybe 10 years ago, who knows when it happened. And then I was talking to somebody about that, and they said, "Well, have you heard of orthosomnia?" And I was like, "No." Like, and I'm not a great sleeper, right? So, so this is the genesis of my story. So I used to, and I'm showing you my finger. It's my wedding band, nothing else. Wear an aura ring, and the aura ring does a really great job. My wife is a cardiovascular researcher, and her lab uses them all the time to estimate heart rate variability, and they do a very good job on that. She tells me. And sleep is the portion of the measurement period where they're really good. And so they give you a sleep score and they give you all kinds of things like this. So I thought that's what I need. I need an Aura ring because my wife's wearing one. She's using them. I need to track my sleep. And so I was wearing this ring. I had it for a number of years. And basically what it did was confirm for me when I had a crappy night's sleep that I had a crappy night's sleep. And it would say your sleep score is, 62, right? And my wife is like an Olympic caliber sleeper. Like if there were a gold medal, she would win it.
They always find
I
each other,
know,
the good one and the
and
bad
she would
one.
be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, my sleep score is like 94." I'm like, 94? Like, who gets a 94? Like, what the hell? Like scores I could only ever dream of. Anyway, so this orthosomnia is people like me obsessing over my sleep score, going like, and losing sleep over my sleep score, which is, there's the cruel irony involved. And I was traveling, can't even remember where I was going, but somewhere in the world, and I lost the charger to the ring, and it's quite specific because you got to lay the ring on the charger and everything. It's not like you can plug it in or anything. And I came back and I said, "Oh, I've lost the charger." And she said, "Well, you can use mine." And I said, "No, it's actually sized for the ring, and mine's quite a bit bigger than the one she wears." She goes, "Oh, you're just going to have to order a new charger." And after about a week of not wearing the ring, I was like, "Actually, I don't think
I think my sleep's
I,
better.
I don't need, yeah." Like I wake up, and if I had a crappy night's sleep, I had a crappy night's sleep, and there's no
I know it.
score
Yeah.
to tell me. I knew I did, right? So I don't know. So it was this sort of thing, and I was like, this orthosomnia, like, was that me? Was I really worried about the sleep score? All I know is it was the first thing I would check in the morning, and I'm like, hmm. So then I began to think, and people are like, everybody's got a CGM on if they're diabetic or not. They've got this, and this, and they've got all these, Whoop band and everything. And look, if you can put it in perspective, and my wife definitely does, she sort of sees it as kind of I won't be disingenuous, but a toy to, it's just a fun thing or whatever.
It's an interesting data point. Yeah.
Yeah, some people are able to absorb it and use it, and it doesn't. They say it just has no effect on them. But there are a group of people, and some have contacted me on social media, and others like, "What do you think of this?" And you can tell that they're worried about their, like, geez, I didn't get my 10,000 steps, so they reduced their step goal to 7,000, and they're like, and I hit it all the time, and I'm like, good. Is that the right
What's
good
the problem?
score? I'm like,
Yeah.
so you make yourself feel good because you hit the goal of the device that you're watching to see if you hit your goal, right? So
Yeah.
you just lower the target, right? So,
Yeah.
optimal sleep score zone, 65. All of a sudden I'm a great, and I don't mean to be trite, like but I think for some people it was generated. You could feel it was generating some anxiety, and so this obsession with metrics, and that's the orthometria. So it doesn't really matter what devices. I think for some people has become a little bit of and so you put the post up, and there's some people they just scroll and go, what a dummy, who cares? Like, I wear this and I don't obsess at all. But some people on there are commenting like, you're right, I lost this device and actually it's been better since, or this, I broke, and then when it broke I felt like somewhat liberated, or like other people are like, I don't track anything because I do find that I obsess about the numbers. And so, it's not for everybody, but I think that spurred on a little bit by some, without naming names, but social media influencers who described events that I considered to be day to day events and what it did to their metrics. And they looked really fragile to me. Like, they're like, this disturbed my, XYZ for X number of weeks. And I'm like, man, that's just life. That's, I have a grant due. I know my sleep's not going to be great. I know I'm going to be kind of crabby. My mood's not good. My cortisol is probably up. I don't measure it, but that's life. So should I avoid all of these things? I don't know.
Yes. So that's what I want to dive into a little bit more, because I wonder if you feel any responsibility, because we, as like you specifically as an educator, and then myself as like a practitioner, like I've been telling people for years, like try to get your 10,000 steps,
Yeah.
8 hours of sleep, like shoot for all these things.
Sure.
Did you ever think that people would eventually start stressing over it? Like, I feel like this is the perfect example of unintended consequences that like just happen in this day and age, right? Like we try to fix something and it creates problems in so many other places that we never thought we had problems in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intent is good. 10,000 steps, and I think the intention there is good. I mean, the origins of 10,000 steps are probably a little less scientifically foundational than a lot of people might believe, or have been told. I mean, 10,000 is a good number, right? And it's kind of round. It's got lots of zeros.
Sounds good.
Likely, the health benefits are accruing as soon as you hit about sort of 5,000. They're rampant. It's dose response 5 to 7. And then it sort of begins to flatten off a little bit. Like it doesn't keep going up to 10. It sort of just begins to level off. And it's like, what's the incremental benefit? So you squeeze more benefit probably going from 7 to 10. But the risk curve, if this is relative risk, is sort of dropping, and then it's starting to flatten off to the point where does this say, 3,000 steps matter? And I don't know if that's the case, but I do think that, the information and the target was well intentioned. I don't think it was ever intended to create anxiety in people from not hitting it. But as soon as you've got a device that tells you this is how many steps you've taken, then people naturally who are inclined to measure data, and there's lots of us, right? Myself included, you want to complete your rings. You want to do this. This is an analog watch. I hasten to
Yeah.
hands, so uh, and I get it. I understand. Everybody. I'm looking for my phone. I have panic attack, but everybody has a phone, right? And everybody's, that thing. It measures steps, and so you don't need to even have the device. You just turn on, Apple Health or some other tracker, and you're there. The proliferation of these devices is really what is now, I think, created the sort of environment where people worry about a lot of things, maybe unnecessarily. Not everybody, but some people, sure.
I think you're getting into an interesting space too with this new lab as well, because with this health optimization and kind of health span versus longevity, you're sort of crossing over into that area that's filled with, I don't want to say charlatans is not the right word, because I think a lot of these people are well-intentioned, or maybe they at least started well-intentioned, right? But like, I think of the Hubermans and the Atias and stuff of the world, and it's like, they're trying to synthesize research down in a way that's digestible for people,
Right.
and pulling from all these different areas that can potentially lead to, health optimization, right? But once you start hammering home these things over and over again, people think like, if I don't do this, I'm going to die. Like all of a sudden I'm going to die, 30 years before my time.
Yeah.
When really, as we know, it's like, all of these are just little pieces that we're building together, right? So if you can't hit your step goal, but you're resistance training on a regular basis, and you're, eating in, a healthy way, like you're probably way better off than somebody that's getting 10,000 steps, but is eating McDonald's 5 times a day and not resistance training, right? So everything's sort of a trade-off there. With all that stuff we've talked about, just going a little deeper into each of these, the three I highlighted, and it's funny because these are the exact ones you mentioned. So I think I had a good idea of what we were going to talk about there. So firstly was steps. Next was sleep. And then the last one was blood sugar. So like the CGMs.
Yep.
So with steps, I think we've covered a lot of it already.
Yep.
But this is just the way I like to break it down to clients, because we do health coaching at Reform Fitness now.
Sure.
And, we focus on movement, sleep, exercise, nutrition, and hydration. So we're trying to keep it really simple for people. So the way I like to break down the steps is, you can have your number, but let's just use 10,000 because it's nice and round.
Sure.
I kind of explain it the same way I would calories, right? Like if you can eat in a 500 calorie a day deficit, and again, just for ease of math, let's say that's 2,000 calories a day, achieve 500 below maintenance.
Yep.
I don't think of it as 2,000 a day, because that can get people really anxious. Instead, think of it 14,000 per week. And the same kind of thing with steps, right? It doesn't have to be 10,000 per day. It can be 70,000 per week. And if you have a couple of 2, 3, 4 days in there, well, you have the weekend. You can go take a hike. You can do all these things and kind of make up on the back end. Do you think that that's a viable strategy if people do have these goals, but maybe stress out in the micro? Maybe if they zoom out a little bit to the more macro, that could be helpful.
Yeah, so I agree 100%. I mean, I think the big picture is sort of this thing in here, and the sort of the micromanagement. I mean, it sort of describes the way I with students or whatever, I'm hands off. I just need to make sure that you're going in this direction. And if you find you deviating over here, I'm going to give you a gentle push back to here and sort of, keep you on this path here. So I like that as a sort of a style of the way that, people can run their shows. And I think it does also, part of cognitive behavioral therapy is, which is standard for poor sleep and everything, and not widely available, but the lesson one that they teach you is not every day is going to be perfect, right? And I mean, that's a lot about, if you kind of have a day where you're like, you have that slice of cake because it's somebody's birthday, or you go to an event or whatever. You didn't blow it. You didn't blow it because of that one day. Um, so yeah, the big picture is I think that's a reasonable way of running things, from steps to, caloric deficit or something like that. I mean, I think we've sort of become, micromanagers with the day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour type sort of metrics that I think can really mess some people up for sure.
Yeah, and then with sleep, again, I know this is not your area of expertise, but if the average recommendation is say
But a
6 to 8 hours.
experience.
Yeah, lived experience for sure. Well, what I found, and I'll speak exactly to what you said, and this is what I've started telling my clients as well, if they struggle with sleep and they're tracking it,
Mm.
is first create a subjective marker first thing when you wake up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you feel?
Yeah.
Because that's more important. And the same thing is true for athletes. Like, subjective measures of readiness are way better than like all these other markers of readiness. And it just makes sense with the human condition. Like, yes, we know you should get X amount of deep sleep. You should get X amount of REM, but it's not a perfect system. And sometimes I get great sleep on paper, but it doesn't actually translate to me feeling good. Maybe I woke up in the wrong sleep cycle. So I always advocate for people to have that subjective measure when they wake up and then compare it. Like, if you subjectively slept a 9, but your watch says 62, don't worry about the watch. Like, feel great. Just go into the day and attack it as if you got a 95 like your wife.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts on like sleep, how to kind of mentally wrap your head around it?
So spot on. I mean, I think that, and there's a perfect analogy in the sporting world. And when you talk to people at the really high levels of sport, they want to track a lot of things, particularly in season, around, what's this injury doing? How do you feel, and everything like that. And, so you could do urine samples, blood samples, and all of these things and measure like a million different things, and then look for what's predicting, are we heading into a phase with a particular player or something like that where they might be at greater risk of injury. Some people have tried that sort of thing, and yet they find that the thing that kind of correlates best is when the player self-reports like, I'm a 4 out of 10, where 10 is like, I'm crushing it, right? And when you're in season, you could expect maybe you're never higher than a 7, because you're, experiencing everything. And I'm like, that's just this sort of overall global subjective, how are you feeling type score, right? And these are, they're reported in confidence by players, but those are the things that really. So I think this is to your point, is that I wake up some days and now without my Aura ring, and it's like, for Stu Phillips, that was a good night. I slept well. I didn't wake up. Earplugs have been a revelation. The mask, I'm okay with it, but when I travel, those are de rigueur pieces of what I take to try and sort of get to the basically, because travel is disruptive, period. But I have other nights where I probably was in bed and I think asleep for enough hours, but it doesn't really feel like I got a restful sleep. And what all of I would point out, and we had this discussion with a good friend of mine just yesterday, in fact, and he had an Aura, a Whoop, a few other devices, an Apple Watch, and I think a device that measures actually sleep. And they were different by over 300% in cases of like REM sleep, deep sleep, and even sleep duration, not 300%, but by over 100%. So how good is the device? How, and the ring is definitely pretty good, particularly if you track it for enough times, and it can see, is it sort of dot, 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 and then you do this, or dot, dot, you do that, whatever. And that's what it's pretty good at, is seeing a deviation. But when these devices give you different answers to the question that should be standard, and as we were discussing, I mean, if you were a sleep researcher, it would be you do a polysomnographic test, and you'd wear a cap with 1,000 sensors, and there's kind of brain activity. What the rings actually usually measure is how much you toss and turn, and that's fine. But just so that everybody knows, it's not actually measuring like REM sleep.
It's all proxies and algorithms.
Heart rate, and depending on how good it is. But it's genuinely, if you flop around in bed and you have a disturbed sleep, that's what it's picking up. So, once you begin to realize some of these things, I was like, yeah, I don't need a device to tell me that. I'm pretty sure I had crummy sleep.
Yeah,
So
you can figure that out on your own.
yeah,
No, I think that's
yeah,
great. And then last one here, quick, because I do want to get just a little bit at least into the strength and hypertrophy piece. Is what are
sure.
your thoughts on continuous glucose monitors for people who don't have blood sugar conditions like diabetes?
Yeah.
Or are struggling specifically with like food allergies or working with a nutritionist to track something. What do you think is the viability or the importance of seeing how your blood sugar spikes after you eat cake, since we've been coming back to that analogy
Yeah.
over and over again? Do you think that they have a place, or is that probably, because in my mind, that's kind of the silliest one. And maybe you can explain why, because of the natural fluctuations that happen with blood sugar throughout the course of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's like a lot of things when you put it in, and these are reasonably accurate devices. Like, to be clear, everybody goes, they measure blood glucose. They don't. They actually measure what we call interstitial. So it's beneath the skin, but it's the fluid between cells. So it's not actually sticking in to your blood, but it has a decent relationship with blood glucose. So I think when you see those numbers for the first time and you're told that this is sort of, normoglycemia or the normal range of blood glucose, and you see something up here and people are telling you high glucose causes, glycation end products, and it's a sign of aging, and the more we have of these, people with type 2 diabetes, yada yada yada, and there's a lot of sort of, like I call it the noise zone, where there's a lot of kind of preying on people's fears, right? When people say, you know, time spent in this range is the leading cause of adult blindness, which is true if you have type 2 diabetes. Time spent in this
Yeah.
range is the leading cause of adult below knee amputations if you have type 2 diabetes. And I'm like,
Yeah.
true, like, and kidney failure and everything. And you're like, oh man, I don't want to go blind or lose my leg or, be on dialysis. So, you can be forgiven for falling prey to a lot of very real consequences of unregulated blood glucose control. Um, for most people who are not type 2 diabetic, those excursions in blood glucose are just a normal part of eating food. A lot of people are like, well, if I eat low carb, and I'm like, then yeah, for sure, you would be down here. Personally, I like to eat bread. I like rice. I like pasta. Uh, I like. I'm not a huge fan of cake, but I will eat cake on someone's birthday
Occasional
usually.
cake. Yeah.
Yeah, like the line I often use is that exercise is the forgiver, quote unquote, of many. And I need to preface this because I used to say just say sins, and somebody told me it was a sin to say that. So I'm just going to say it's the forgiver of many metabolic sins.
Okay.
So I'm not absolving people of yeah, it's not general absolution that I used to ask my priest for like all the time when I was a younger person.
That would be probably a pretty popular church, though, if you could
Yeah,
just
it
fork
would.
out
It'd be
and
great.
be
Yeah,
absolved of your sins instead of
yeah,
going to
yeah,
talk to
yeah.
somebody a little.
Yeah,
I would go
but
there.
it really does, and I mean, you can, if you've ever worn one and worn it for a period of time, it's interesting to sort of see. And there's a few things that you're like, oh, I just had a pizza, which is my desert island food. So if you don't like pizza and you don't like carbohydrate in the crust, you're not on my team. So I had a big pizza, and I was like, whoa, look at those. You put your phone, you're like, look at those numbers. That's crazy. And then, an hour later, you're like, back in the normal range. But I don't know if that would have happened if it was taken on a day where, like, I didn't do a big workout in the morning. And I'm sure that helped flatten out that curve a little bit. So, I think that everything with a dose of reality. What do those mean for somebody without type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes, where I think that there's a legitimate, use for these things to show you where your blood glucose is? I think that I'd agree with you that it's on the if here is useful and here is useless, it's probably closer to the useless side of things in terms of the practical and actionable information that you could get and that should result in action. In other words, if you see your blood glucose spike because you just had a bowl of pasta, that's what happens when you have a bowl of pasta. Like the carbohydrates in there trigger an insulin response. Blood glucose is high. That's what triggered the insulin, and it comes back down. You spend 38, 58 minutes, above target range. Big deal. Like, did you enjoy the pasta? Is
Yeah,
that like the
exactly.
first
Yeah.
question?
I'm more
Or the
worried after I eat a
bread
big
or
bowl of pasta about
whatever.
how my stomach feels after, not what my blood sugar is doing.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And I think again, perspective, zooming out versus being super focused on the micro there. So I know we've only got a few minutes left here, Stu. So I just quickly want you to kind of review for us kind of this relationship between strength and hypertrophy. And we can keep it very high level. But I just
Yeah.
had a just the reason this sparked in my head today is I had a client I was training. She's actually in Spain, and she said something that many women say to me when they first come in is, I don't want to get too bulky. Right. I want to, work out. She's working out pretty consistently. We ended up using significantly heavier weights than she would ever have used on her own.
Yeah.
So just kind of talk to me a little bit about, for people who are maybe newer to training, of how the relationship between strength and hypertrophy works, why it's probably a little foolish to be worried that you're going to get, turn into Mike Metzer or Arnold Schwarzenegger all of a sudden, and then maybe how that relationship actually works over the long term, because it's not as linear as a lot of people who come into the gym for the first time believe, right? A lot of people think if I get stronger, which they kind of want to do,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get more muscular. And as we know, that's not always the case. Can you maybe explain why as well?
Yeah, for sure. So, unpacking first the idea that strength and hypertrophy or muscle growth are related. I mean, I think that that's a fair, sort of assumption. And oftentimes people point out that if you take a look at, say, the world powerlifting records, is that smaller people lift lighter weights, it's almost a sort of a perfect relationship. And don't get me wrong, you could be forgiven if you looked at that and said, well, look, these people are definitely bigger and they're stronger. So there's a relationship between these two things. I think the more important relationship is within yourself. If you get stronger, how much bigger are you going to get? So first, strength is a function of two things: how much muscle you have, for sure, but how much you practice doing the activity that you define as being stronger, right? So in your client's case, I'm sure that she would have experienced, she just started, it was a 10-pound dumbbell, 6 months into it, and she finds she's able to lift 30-pound dumbbells. So that's 3 times what she was lifting to begin with, but she's not 3 times bigger. If we were to,
Hopefully.
I mean, would we all, I'm sure there's a bunch of guys would be like, I would love if that happened. Women, I get it. I get the bulky argument. They don't want to have a masculine physique, but they want to be stronger, and they should want to be stronger from so many health standpoints and the benefits that it brings. I mean, I think that I really had hoped that the mantra that I seemed to feel like was settling in, particularly to women and lifting weights, was, strong, not skinny. And that skinny, there's obviously a detriment to, and yet it seems like with a lot of GLP-1 drugs, like, because I believe that that's what's creating it, is that skinny is kind of coming back, and
It is. It's weird.
I don't think it's good. So, first, not many women lift weights, and I think that that's the kind of rider statement where I'm like, we need to change that, and if it's fear that you're going to get bulky, we need to change that perception too. So strength happens because your brain gets more efficient at talking to your muscles get more efficient at firing what we call motor units, and the motor units activate the muscle fibers, and they all fire at the same time. And so strength comes really quickly, actually, and that's great. The muscle growth sort of, kind of plods along a little bit slower. It's right behind it, but it's not a one-to-one relationship like people would have you think. And I think that there's been, a few papers that have come out recently which have sort of challenged that, and maybe, but I think in the final analysis, if you dig really, really deep, you get disproportionately greater strength increases relative to the muscle that you would gain. Um, the strength issue is that's the big one in my mind, because strength is fit for purpose, and why do you want to be strong? And I guess that's the question of answering your why that you're in the weight room for. But everything in the world gets lighter when you're stronger, and that applies to, it's not just picking up heavy stuff. It's like even light stuff becomes a dawdle, right? And things that used to be you're like would tire you out, all of a sudden don't. Oh, plus you sleep better, plus you feel better, plus your blood glucose is better. If you're wearing a monitor, you notice that. But lots of other things fall into place, and I think that some of those things that used to be is that strength training from the health benefits is over here, and aerobic training is here. And the reality is the two of them lay almost on top of each other with respect to all of these things. Both are better. If you can be cardiovascularly fit and strong, like two thumbs up. But so few people do the strength side of things. And at some point in your life, and I'm convinced of this more and more, mainly because of my interaction with the seniors exercise center that we have here, it's strength and power that's going to limit something you do. When you talk to those people, it's not really their heart and their lungs, unless that's in poor shape to begin with. But it's something they go, I just can't do this, and I'm like, that's strength. And they, I just can't, and I'm like, that's power. So
Yeah.
try and hang on to that and preserve it and build a reserve and everything, because that's going to see you through a lot of different circumstances in your life that are going to knock you back at some point.
Yeah, and I think there are these outliers specifically with like a muscle growth potential that
Mm-hmm.
supersedes
Sure.
their strength gaining capabilities. And I've seen these types of individuals occasionally where
Yeah.
strength and hypertrophy run almost in unison. Sometimes
Yeah.
hypertrophy exceeds strength even. Like I've met
Yeah.
guys who are giant who are not very strong at all.
Yeah.
But I think that's where the nuance comes in too. And then you see these other videos where it's it can get much deeper than this, obviously, right? We have motor unit recruitment, and there's varying capabilities amongst different people. So some people can only recruit, say, 30% of their motor units. Other people are highly capable and neuroadaptive, and they can go up to, I'm just making this number up, but say 70%. So you could have two people same size, same technical muscle mass, but one is significantly stronger than the other because they can exert more force through their actual muscles. There's a guy I remember seeing on YouTube a few years back who's like famous. He's fairly in shape, but he just kind of looks like a manual laborer. He's nothing special. And this guy just bends rebar. Like he's got, like, do you know who I'm talking about? He just
Yeah,
bends
yeah,
all
I've seen
kinds of
some
crazy
videos.
shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I mean,
it's wild.
this is the individual variability piece
Yes.
that, myself and a few of us, we got together in Finland recently. We just published a paper, the proceedings of the conference, which is to talk about Brad Schoenfeld, Mike Roberts were all part of this, and Marcus Baumann. And we were trying to sort of figure out, why is it that some person, I've seen these same people, is that you give them a weight, and it's almost like you can watch them literally get bigger. It happens in women too, rarely, but it's all relative.
Don't say
Women
that,
start
Stu.
down here, and you sort of see this, uh, but it's a rare woman or man who gets this sort of bulk and adds it really, really quickly. But they do happen for sure.
Yeah, I think in my 10 years in the industry, I've trained close to 30,000 sessions now, and I was actually talking to
Nice.
someone about this the other day. I've had
Yeah.
one client who was a female who came to me and said, "I don't want to get bulky." And she was the only one that I accidentally got really bulky because she was
Yeah.
one of those genetic outliers. And I didn't
Mm.
know enough of like how to back up her workouts or how to program effectively, because this was very early on in my career, where
Yeah.
I mean, after 5 workouts, her traps looked like a middle linebacker. And she
Yeah.
warned me about it coming in, but I was just like,
Mm.
no, that's not going to happen. And she's the by far the exception to the rule. So I know we've got to wrap up here, Stu. I know you've got to run off, but I so appreciate you taking the time today. Hopefully our listeners got some good information out of this. Maybe next time we have you on, we can dive into the peptides a little bit more. But just again, big overarching review here, the orthometria. Stop obsessing over all these metrics. If you find you're that type of person who first thing in the morning, you're looking at your Oura ring or you're looking at your watch, and that's affecting how you go through the rest of the day, maybe it's time to take a little sabbatical from that. Take a step back and see if
See
you
how
can
you feel.
subjectively.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And then with strength and hypertrophy, obviously not a perfect one-to-one relationship, but strength will almost always supersede hypertrophy. And it's really a rare person who is going to have to worry about going into the gym, picking up a couple of weights, and then next thing they know, they put on, 30 pounds of muscle. So that one is pretty much overblown for most people, not something you really need to worry about. Quickly, before I let you go, what else are you working on? Is there anything super exciting coming up? I know you've got the grant that you guys are working together on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so
Any specific things?
that's taken up a lot of my time. That's really what I'm hopping on to do. And clearly that's the, as you say, it's the roadmap for the future. It is an endowment. So somebody asked me, they go, how long will this be in place? I'm like, forever, as long as the university, I guess. Yeah, I mean, we're doing a ton of work in women. We've got a study in perimenopausal women. We've got a study in young women lifting lighter and heavier loads. That's Derek Van Every. Alicia's wrapping up her PhD, so she's got some really great stuff about to come out. And yeah, so old aging is always part of it because research is me search. So yeah, we're doing some really good stuff. The students, they keep me engaged. It's the reason I love coming to work, and so yeah, they deserve the kudos for all of this. I won't steal their thunder, their punchline, but you'll see it in a journal. A lot of it coming out later this
That's
year for
awesome. I'll
sure.
have to get all those guys back on.
Yeah, please
Lastly,
do.
just about the podcast, where's the best place for people to find out more about that, to listen to it, to support? How often
Sure.
is it coming out? Stuff like that.
Yeah. It's a weekly drop. Tuesdays usually are when the episodes come out. Real exercise science, one word. Just about every platform on there. Substack's probably the best place to go. Just type in at Real Exercise Science. And if you follow us on Substack, that's where everything drops, and you can find all of the platforms on there. Yeah, as the phrase goes, give us a like, give us a share. Share it with people. Yada yada yada. Yeah, that sort of
Definitely.
thing. So yeah.
Definitely. And I'll make sure I tag it in the description. Stu, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for taking the
My
time today.
pleasure.
I really appreciate it, sir. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode of Exercise is Bullshit.